I walked in on my wife with her affair partner in our bed, and let me tell you, I didn't waste any time kicking him out of my house. This story isn't short, so buckle up. I'm Luke, 44 years old, and my soon-to-be ex-wife, Emily, is 39. We've been married for 11 years and don't have any kids. For most of that time, we were what you'd call a couple on the heavier side. That all changed about 2 years ago when I had some blood work done and found out I was at risk of developing diabetes, gout, and hypertension. Those results shook me to my core, so both Emily and I decided to make some major changes and started living a much healthier lifestyle. Over time, I dropped from 258 to 187 pounds, and Emily slimmed down from 183 to 143 pounds. We felt incredible, and the best part? I never ended up developing any of those illnesses. Almost every afternoon, we hit the gym where this guy, let's call him Mike, worked as a coach. When Emily started getting into shape, I couldn't help but notice the way other guys turned their heads to look at her. I was so proud of her. She has a naturally curvy figure, and her legs, well, let's just say they're hard not to admire. Mike was no different from the rest of the gym crowd. He'd sneak glances, and it didn't take much to see he had a thing for women's backsides. I caught him checking out more than a few. On top of that, he loved showing off how jacked he was. As we became regulars at the gym, I started to notice Emily seemed to enjoy the attention she was getting from the guys around her. It wasn't hard to miss, and honestly, I couldn't really blame her for feeling good about it. One afternoon, we were on the elliptical machines at the gym, and right in front of us was a cable machine. Out of nowhere, Mike, our self-proclaimed gym hero, took off his t-shirt and started doing cable crossovers. I turned to Emily, raising an eyebrow with a look that clearly said, "Can you believe this guy?" But to my shock, she was watching him intently and even licked her lips. I couldn't believe it. When I glanced back at Mike, I swear he was grinning like he knew exactly what was happening. It felt like someone had just punched me in the gut. Sure, I was getting in shape, but I wasn't anywhere near as ripped or sculpted as he was. On the drive home, I casually brought it up, mentioning how Mike was obviously showing off. Emily just said, "Really?" I didn't notice. I wasn't about to let that slide and replied, "You were staring at him." She paused for a moment and then said, "I don't remember doing that." I must have been lost in thought. I let it go for the moment and kept driving, but from that point on, I couldn't ignore the fact that they were chatting more and more at the gym. A few weeks later, Emily was using the Smith machine to do squats. Out of nowhere, Mike swooped in to help her. Isn't he just the nicest guy? He was holding her by the waist, and I could feel my blood boiling. Once she finished her first set, I marched over and, in a tone that left no room for pleasantries, told him, "I've got it from here." Mike just flashed me his usual smug smile and said, "No problem, buddy," before sauntering off. By the way, he calls everyone buddy, which only made it more irritating. Emily knows me well enough to pick up on my tone, and she immediately responded, "Oh, come on, Luke." I didn't want to make a scene, so I simply told her, "We'll talk about this at home." And, oh boy, did the drama explode once we got home. Emily accused me of being immature and jealous. I shot back, saying I could see right through Mike's act. He was clearly trying to make a move on her. She admitted she could tell he was flirting but insisted she would never cheat on me. That didn't sit right with me, so I asked why she let him touch her like that. Her answer? I didn't want to be rude. We went back and forth for over an hour, with things getting heated on both sides. Eventually, we agreed to switch gyms, thinking it might solve the issue. We did start working out somewhere else, but Emily stayed resentful for months afterward. She kept saying the real problem was that I didn't trust her, and honestly, it felt like a shadow hanging over us ever since. About 3 months after we switched gyms, a fantastic opportunity came up at my job. The catch? It was in the afternoon. Emily and I talked it over, and I decided to take it, even though it meant we'd have to go to the gym at different times. I started working out in the mornings, and she went in the afternoons. That's when everything began to spiral. Emily's resentment toward me seemed to grow by the day. We hardly talked anymore. I tried to keep the connection alive by texting her about my day, telling her I missed her, and sending her funny memes, but her replies were usually short and uninterested, things like yes, okay, same here, or just ha ha ha. I felt like I was losing her. Desperate to fix our marriage, I suggested couples therapy, but she shot it down, saying I was the one with the problem. "You need therapy for your trust issues, not me," she said. I was so determined to make things work that I agreed. For all I knew, maybe she was right. Maybe it was my fault. So, in 2022, I started therapy, but Emily's behavior didn't change. We stopped being intimate, she was never in the mood. I couldn't help but feel something was off, so I started checking. I snooped through her phone but didn't find anything suspicious. I even looked through her car, thinking maybe she had a second phone hidden somewhere. Nothing. Her phone's map history showed the same routine every day, house to work to gym and back home. But when I tried to talk to her about how distant she'd become, she brushed it off, saying she was going through a 40s phase and that it would pass. I never had any solid evidence of cheating, so I kept working and worrying, trying to convince myself I was overthinking things. One day, as I was coming home, I ran into Mr. Peterson, the condo's friendly security guard. He's always up for a chat. That day, he was rubbing his shoulder and mentioned he'd strained it moving a heavy sofa. I sympathized with him, but then he casually dropped a bombshell. "Maybe you can ask your masseuse to help me out," he said. "My masseuse?" I asked, confused. "Yeah, the guy who came by yesterday to massage Mrs. Emily," he replied. It took me a second to process what he'd just said. "Do you have a video of him?" I asked, trying to stay calm. Mr. Peterson must have noticed how pale I'd gone because he quickly showed me the footage. And there he was, Mike, her old gym coach, waltzing into our condo. Apparently, this wasn't the first time either. I took the day off work and started digging. I borrowed a coworker's car that afternoon and followed Emily. She parked at the mall where the gym was, and there was Mike, waiting for her. They looked so comfortable together, laughing and holding hands like a couple of teenagers. I watched as they kissed, hugged, and walked arm in arm to a nearby residential area. My heart was pounding, and I felt tears welling up, but I forced myself to stay focused. When they disappeared into a building, I tried to follow with my phone ready to record. But a guard stopped me, asking, "Can I help you?" Thinking quickly, I smiled and said, "What a lovely couple, do you know them?" He nodded and said, "I think they're newlyweds, but that's all I know." Feeling defeated, I called Emily, but she didn't pick up. I went back to her car at the mall, wondering why this location never showed up on her map history. Then it hit me, her phone was in the car. That's why it didn't log anything. I also found out something else: Emily hadn't set foot in the gym for 8 months. That night turned out to be the last time I ever shared a bed with her. After returning the borrowed car, I went home and called my parents. Thankfully, my dad picked up. I broke down crying as I told him everything. He comforted me and advised me to start gathering evidence while he reached out to a divorce lawyer he trusted. Later, Emily finally called me back after seeing the 2 missed calls. I kept my voice steady and told her, "I'm already home." She said, "I'm on my way back from the gym. My butt is killing me." "Yeah, I'm sure it is." When she got home, she saw my red eyes and asked, "What happened? Why were you crying?" Somehow, I managed to smile and told her I thought I was coming down with the flu. "That's why I left work early," I said. "Don't get too close, I don't want you to catch it. I'll sleep in the spare room tonight." She didn't argue and went along with it. That night, I cried silently and didn't sleep at all. Around midnight, I heard her giggling, probably texting Mike, but I still couldn't find any trace of another man on her phone. Then it hit me. How had I not seen it before? Mike wasn't listed as another man because he was probably disguised as one of her female co-workers. The next morning, while Emily was in the shower, I took her phone and created a session on my laptop to mirror her messages. We both knew each other's passwords, so it was easy enough to unlock. I quickly put her phone back in the same spot and acted like nothing happened. The session would stay active as long as her phone was nearby or connected to the same Wi-Fi network. Then I saw it. There it was, a contact under a female name, with a dumbbell as the profile picture. When I opened the chat, most of the messages had been deleted, but a few had been left behind. They were carefully worded, probably in case I ever snooped. Things like, "Can you deliver the papers on my desk?" Which made no sense because Emily doesn't even have a desk at work, and, heading to the meeting, where are you? But the most damning line sat right at the top, boss is in his office. He's clueless. It didn't take a genius to figure out that I was boss, since Emily's actual boss is a woman. Emily stepped out of the shower and caught me staring at my laptop, pale and sick to my stomach. You look awful, she said casually. Why don't you stay with your parents for a few days? I declined, knowing I needed to stay close to gather more evidence. Once she left for work, I called my dad, who gave me the name and number of a good divorce lawyer. When I explained everything to the lawyer, he was blunt. The screenshots from my laptop were practically useless. Without concrete proof, like Baldy's name or an explicit admission, Emily could spin the conversations to look completely innocent. Even if I caught her and Baldy together at the mall, she could argue they were just friends. And entering private property without permission to get proof? That would only land me in trouble. At work, I was in a daze, desperate for a plan. I considered installing hidden cameras at home, but I knew Baldy rarely came over, and Emily would probably find them anyway. Then it hit me, what if I removed myself from the picture? I texted Emily, telling her I'd tested positive for the flu and would be staying at my parents' house to recover. She responded immediately, saying it was a great idea and that she'd call me every day. When I got home that evening, she had already packed a suitcase for me. I could see the relief on her face, and it was like a punch to the gut. She wanted me gone. I told her I needed my laptop and quickly checked her messages before leaving. Sure enough, there it was, boss will be out of the office, wanna come to my desk. She'd sent it minutes after I told her I was leaving. I didn't say a word about it. We didn't have dinner together, and there were no goodnight kisses or hugs. As I walked out the door, she glanced at her watch, twice. I'll miss you, I said, watching her closely. I expected her to shut the door in my face, but instead, she walked me to the car. It seemed odd at first, but then I realized why. Of course. Baldy was already inside the building, probably hiding in her car or waiting somewhere nearby. If he'd shown up after I left, it would have been far too suspicious. After I drove off, I called my dad and brother, who were parked nearby, waiting to see if Baldy would show up. After about 30 minutes, it hit me, she'd walked me to the car because Baldy was already there. He must have been waiting for me to leave. I turned the car around and hurried back to the condo. Quietly, I let myself in. Music was playing from the bedroom, but it wasn't the sound that froze me, it was the moaning. I crept closer and saw their clothes tossed carelessly onto the sofa outside the bedroom. My hands were shaking, but I pulled out my phone and started recording. Then I opened the door. There she was, Emily, the love of my life for 11 years, on all fours with Baldy right behind her. The shock on their faces when they saw me will be burned into my memory forever. Emily screamed and scrambled for the blanket to cover herself. Baldy, in all his naked glory, puffed up like some kind of alpha male and started walking toward me. Why don't you take a walk, buddy, he growled, his voice full of arrogance. I didn't flinch. Instead, I struck him in the throat with an open palm, just like I'd seen Mel Gibson do in Ransom. Baldy doubled over, coughing and gasping, dropping to his knees. I pointed to the door and yelled, "Get out of my house." He didn't argue. I grabbed his clothes from the sofa, threw them at him, and marched him to the door just as my dad, brother, and Mr. Peterson arrived. I'll handle it from here, I told them firmly before shutting the door. Emily was still on the bed, trembling and clutching the blanket around her. I took a deep breath and said, I have never hurt you, and I never will. Get dressed. I'll be waiting in the living room. Then I left her there and sat down to wait. While I waited, I sent the video to my lawyer. His reply came quickly, I'm sorry for what you're going through, but this is a jackpot for your case. A few minutes later, Emily walked into the living room. She couldn't even look me in the eye. I started recording our conversation. Why? I asked, my voice calm but heavy with the weight of my emotions. She didn't answer. Was I such an awful husband to you? I pressed. She began to cry but still said nothing. Do you love him? I asked, but all I got was a shake of her head. The silence broke something in me. I stood up and slammed my hand on the table. Say something, Emily. Damn it. She flinched, her eyes wide with fear. She looked so fragile, trembling like a scared puppy. I'd never raised my voice at her before, and seeing her react like that only made the situation worse. I sat back down and forced myself to speak calmly. "My lawyer will contact you about the divorce," I said. "Get yourself a lawyer." Finally, she spoke. "We can fix this," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Fix what?" "Our marriage was over the moment Mike came into the picture." "You chose him over me," I replied. "It was a mistake," she said, tears streaming down her face. "No, it wasn't. It was a choice. You chose, and now you're dealing with the consequences. What did you think would happen when I found out?" She said nothing. I stood and looked at her. "Go to your sister's place and tell her the truth, or I will show her the video." Emily nodded and went to the bedroom to pack. I followed her and watched as she neatly folded her clothes and placed them into her suitcase. Her movements, the small quirks I'd once loved so much, cut me deeper than anything else. 2 days ago, I had been trying to convince myself that the woman I loved was already gone. But now, watching her, I felt a wave of emotions crash over me. I went to the spare room and collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. I didn't even hear when she closed the front door. Later, I found she had picked up her clothes from the sofa and even made the bed where I had caught her and Mike. That small act of normalcy broke me again. Later that evening, I called my dad. He told me that Mike had wanted to press charges for the confrontation, but Mr. Peterson pointed out that Mike hadn't signed in at the condo. Technically, that made him a trespasser, and the condo association could sue him. He dropped the idea and left. Apparently, my nosy brother had been pressing his ear to my door during the whole thing. My dad had to drag him away by the ear and into the car. I was exhausted. I hadn't slept properly in days, so when I hit the bed in the spare room, I passed out almost immediately. The next morning, my phone was flooded with messages from Emily. She was apologizing, begging for a second chance. I didn't even bother to read them all, I just blocked her. Then my sister-in-law called. It seemed Emily hadn't told her the full story, only that we'd had a big fight. I guess Emily was too ashamed to admit the truth. Honestly, it's probably for the best. Her father isn't alive to see this, and her mother has advanced dementia. I doubt she'd even understand what's going on. All of this happened about a week ago. Next week, Emily will be served with the divorce papers.